Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. You have joined the Address LC trial studying the impact of Bezisterim and brain fog and fatigue in people with long COVID. I'm Emily Taylor. I'm the president and CEO at Solve. Thank you so much for joining us today as we discuss this exciting clinical trial. The Address LC trial is a double-blind study designed to assess the potential impact of the investigational drug Bezisterim on cognitive impairment, brain fog, and fatigue in adults previously diagnosed with long COVID. This is an exciting trial for several reasons. First, because Bezisterim is an exciting drug. It is an oral capsule that is well tolerated with a good safety profile. It's not an immunosuppressive, and it has a low potential for interactions with other drugs. We're already seeing positive signals in clinical trials that it could prove to be an effective in treating long COVID. People with mild cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's have shown improvement, and we have seen improvements in fatigue and energy in people with Parkinson's disease. We are also excited about this study because its design was informed by lived experience of people with long COVID, and it is currently enrolling. But what excites me most as a policy nerd about this trial is that it's a public-private partnership. It's here thanks to years of hard work by hundreds of advocates fighting for funding opportunities for clinical trials like Address LC. So today, we're going to talk about the specifics of this study, the implications of this trial for people with ME/CFS and other IACCIs, or infection-associated chronic conditions and illnesses, and how you can get involved. If you'd like even more information, you can check out our blog, and they'll drop the link in the chat for you, or in the description under this video for the recording. Our panelists today are Dr. Penny Markham, the Senior Vice President and who leads the liver disease and long COVID programs at BioVie, Dr. Michael Peluso, an Assistant Professor of Medicine at the University of California, San Francisco, and Ezra Spier, creator of longcovidstudies.net and member of the Patient-Led Research Collaborative. Give me a moment. I'd like to introduce them all in a bit more detail. Penny, or Penelope Markham, is a PhD with a senior vice president who leads the long COVID and liver disease program at BioVie. Penny was motivated to develop the Address LC trial after seeing the impact of ME/CFS on the health of a close family member. Penny led the development of modified terrapressin compounds for liver disease at LAT Pharma LLC, and the predecessor to the company of BioVie for 7 years prior to its acquisition by BioVie. Also joining us, welcome Dr. Michael Peluso, who is an infectious disease physician and researcher at the University of California, San Francisco. In March 2020, he implemented the UCSF long-term impact of infection with novel coronavirus, pronounced LINC, research program, which was one of the first post-COVID research programs in the world. It has supported over 75 collaborations investigating the causes of long COVID. LINC includes an observational cohort, tissue biopsy program, and imaging program. He also oversees the Long COVID Trials Unit at USCSF and has engaged in a variety of clinical trials testing around long COVID therapeutics. In addition, Dr. Peluso is responsible for the implementation of the UCSF sites for the National Recover Program and co-directs the San Francisco General Hospital Long COVID Clinic. Dr. Peluso is also an advisor for BioVie on the Address LC trial. And last, but most certainly not least, one of folks I hope to count as a friend, Ezra Spier, who is an Oakland, California-based patient researcher and person with long COVID, a creator of the website Long COVID Studies, longcovidstudies.net. We can drop that one into the chat and description for you as well. He is a member of the Patient-Led Research Collaborative, serves on the Patient Advisory Board for the Address LC trial, and has participated in multiple clinical trials. Outside of long COVID advocacy, Ezra is an independent operations and technology consultant who helps organizations thrive through periods of growth. So Ezra, I'd like to start with you first. If you could tell us a little bit more about your personal journey with long COVID and how did you get interested in clinical trials?
Thanks so much, Emily, and thanks to everybody for being here today. Really excited to talk about this trial. I think my story is probably pretty common at this point for folks that are in this space, but I got COVID for the first time in 2022. It was a relatively mild acute infection, but within about a week, I started experiencing new symptoms, especially fatigue. About 2 months later, I inadvertently overexerted myself and ended up in a deep crash that, in some ways, I'm not sure I've ever really recovered from. I'm still really ill here, about almost kind of getting up on 3 years later. I experience post exertional malaise from cognitive exertion. I've got cognitive dysfunction. I have POTS and a bunch of other symptoms too. It's been a completely life changing experience, and it's made me all the more interested and engaged in finding solutions.
Fantastic. So, tell me a little bit more about the input of people with lived experience on this particular clinical trial when it was in process and in development.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think I'd love to talk a little bit about how I got interested in clinical trials too, which
Oh,
is that,
please.
like, yeah, early in my illness journey, I spent a lot of time and effort and money trying to find doctors who could care for me and treatments that might help. And as I think probably many people watching this know, um, that doesn't get you very far these days. And pretty quickly, I learned that for myself, as someone with long COVID, ME type long COVID, and most people with ICCIs and other chronic illnesses, there just simply isn't much care available, and there aren't very many treatments that are available for us to get help. And so what I realized is we needed new treatments, and the way that scientists and the medical system develop new treatments is through clinical trials. Sort of like, a high school science experiment on a grand scale. It's the same idea. It's just so much more rigorous and so much more expensive. But in 2023, when I was early in my illness, I participated in a trial of Paxlovid for long COVID at Stanford, sort of down the road from where I live. And last year, I was lucky enough to participate in a trial of the antiviral Ensitrelvir at UCSF under Dr. Peluso's team. And it's just been like really meaningful for me to contribute to research myself. It makes me feel that like I'm using my situation to help other people. And it's been really great to meet the teams of folks who really care about people like us. And, Emily mentioned it, but to help other folks have that experience, I built this website, longcovidstudies.net, that basically makes it a little bit easier to find clinical trials near you based on the database that's on clinicaltrials.gov. And so in this time, I've gotten really excited about clinical trials. I think we need to do so many more of them, and I'm really happy to support this one.
Well,
But what you
fantastic.
asked me was was
Yeah.
was the input of people with lived experience, and I think that like anybody who's had one of these illnesses, it is just so important to include people with lived experience in running research studies. And with all due respect to the researchers that are on this call and that work in this field, no matter how much you study something, you're not going to know what it is like to experience it unless you've experienced it yourself. And so, in a condition like long COVID, where things are changing really quickly, the science is changing, and there's so much wisdom in the community, we can provide really helpful advice and counsel to researchers and people with lived experience, whether they're patients like me or whether they're family members or caregivers. We can help researchers do better science. Our feedback can help trials avoid pitfalls. We can help make sure that the right things are being measured, and we can help find the right participants that help ensure success. And most of all, the thing that I really care about is we can help make sure that trials are as safe as possible. And that's especially important with energy limiting conditions like long COVID and ME, where we all know what the impact of overexertion could be. Like I know that personally deeply, and I want to make sure that we are balancing the risks with the potential benefits of these trials.
Here, here. So, I'd love to hear a little bit more of an example of how you brought that perspective in a very real way to the Address LC trial, a little bit more about how that was incorporated in this trial particularly.
Totally. So I want to shout out to a great group of patient advisors that were all part of this process. Anicia Corona, Lisa McCorkle, Shamir Sweeney, and Angela Vasquez, really amazing folks. And what was really great about this group is we each brought sort of a different kind of experience to the group. And I think that really strengthened both our conversations and the overall outcome. We had the opportunity to review the trial's full protocol. So basically, the Bible of what folks are going to be going through. We were able to share feedback on criteria that participants would need to meet to join or maybe not be allowed to join the trial. We talked in depth about the requirements, the kind of visits that would be required. We talked about what might make it easier or less risky for people to participate. So for example, we spent a lot of time kind of talking about how to provide opportunities for rest. So folks that are doing kind of taxing study activities could rest and not overexert. We also talked about the importance of masking and how that's a really critical thing for our community, so that we don't unnecessarily expose people to further infections. And so the other thing that we were able to help with was on the trial website and marketing. We want this trial to bring, to feel welcoming to people. We want our community to want to participate. And so we tried to make sure that the language was as accessible and resonant as possible.
That sounds amazing, and it sounds like you really made some very forward momentum and a lot of changes that impacted the quality of the participation of these patients. So thank you, thank you. So I shared a little bit about what excites me about this trial to kick us off, but I'm going to ask you the same question. What excites you about this trial? Why this trial when you have such few spoons to give and so many trials that could use support? Why did this one call to you?
Well, I think, it's really exciting to see a pharmaceutical company engage in long COVID research. And, I think you could probably count on two hands the number of private companies that have engaged in this research. And every trial is like a shot on goal that gives us an opportunity to learn more about the condition. And then, better yet, for this, potentially find a pathway for a treatment that could really help people. I know that others are going to be talking a lot more about the drug that's being tested, but from what I understand about it and what I know about long COVID and other conditions, I think it could be really promising. It may not be a drug that's going to kind of cure everybody forever, but there's a lot of symptoms that myself and probably millions of other people are dealing with that this could potentially help. And, anything that we can do to make our quality of life better is worth it, in my opinion. I also think that it's been really important that the researchers have focused on a specific subtype of symptoms for patients in the study. And you'll hear a little bit more about this later, but it's really topical because there was a article that came out today in Stat News by Betsy Ladajats about another pharmaceutical company that ran a long COVID trial with sort of broad criteria. And what ended up happening was that they weren't able to find a signal and the company actually went out of business. And that's,
Oh.
we don't really know if that drug maybe would have done, would have been sort of successful if a different group of patients were studied or it was measured slightly differently. And so I really
Mhm.
appreciate that we're trying to strengthen the field, do really good science to get to the answers that we all really need. And so finally, I just think it's really important. This drug is something that could potentially be useful for other ISCCIs and other, more conventional diseases as well. And the more evidence that we have for it, the more likelihood that we'll be able to get it into our pharmacies. So I'm very excited about the potential.
That's so fascinating. I love that when you're the basically zeroing in on the symptom actually expands the potential impact of the drug. I love that approach. That's so thoughtful and insightful. Thank you, Ezra. I look forward to bringing some more questions back to you in our panel. But now we'll get some clinical perspective from Dr. Michael Peluso. Hi, Dr. Peluso. Thank you so much again for joining us.
Hey,
Would you mind sharing with me how did you get involved in this field and begin studying long COVID?
yeah, hey everybody. Really happy to be here. So yeah, it's interesting to think back to the very beginning. Before 2020, the primary focus of our research group here at UCSF was almost exclusively on HIV infection, trying to understand how HIV causes chronic illness and also how to cure people of HIV. And what happened in March of 2020, basically is the world shut down, we decided to shift our focus to what was happening to people after they had COVID. This was when, COVID was framed on TV as a 2-week illness, and we knew based on our experience in other infectious diseases that that was, unlikely to be the case. That in some cases it was likely to be more complicated than that. And so we moved quickly and launched our research program, as you mentioned, called Link, in early April 2020. And within a few weeks of opening the program, we began to encounter people with what would now be called long COVID, although people didn't necessarily label it as such at the time. And so people started to come to see us to, donate blood and other biospecimens. And we're basically saying, 6 weeks have passed, 8 weeks have passed. I'm not back to what I was before I had this. And then even more concerningly, a number of people saying, I have this really crushing fatigue, bad post-exertional malaise. I have such bad cognitive symptoms that I haven't been able to go back to work. And so that ultimately became the focus of our research program, and it, is now continues 5 years later to be what we're spending most of our time on.
Wow, that is such a wild twist and turn that brought you to here. And so speaking of kind of where we're at now, what do you, if you had to, and I know this is a really big question, so I'm going to ask you to be short with it, but what is the field's currently understanding of where we are here on the biology of long COVID? And how does inflammation specifically fit into that picture? Because that's one of the areas that this trial really focuses on.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, the biology is really complicated, but I do think that we have made, really tremendous progress in the last 5 years. And in part, a lot of that progress has been informed by work, in ME and other conditions that preceded that by, decades. I think that where the field is at now is this understanding that chronic inflammation and activation of the immune system are really key to the pathobiology.
Mhm.
These can be caused by things that we talk about, like, persistence of SARS-CoV-2, reprogramming of different arms of the immune system, reactivation of other viruses like EBV, the virus that causes mono. Um, but we're not thinking about those things in silos anymore. We're really starting to take a more nuanced view mechanistically. And so we're recognizing that all of these processes are likely to be interrelated and that there's not just one direction. They can all sort of drive each other. So as an example of that, while we think about persistence of the virus as a driver of inflammation in some people, it's also now becoming clear that inflammation can cause abnormal immune responses that allow the virus to persist. And so you can construct models like that for each of the different pathways in long COVID. And ultimately, dysfunction of the immune system and inflammation is at the center of many of those pathways, which are really these sort of cycles of pathology. And this trial will try to address that.
Absolutely. And the evidence continues to pile up as study after study sort of continues to reinforce or add new nuances to that connection.
Yeah, that's
So,
correct.
so speaking of all these different studies, how did you get involved with this particular trial?
Yeah, so actually I've been involved with this study since I think May of 2022,
Oh, wow.
when Dr. Markham emailed me and Steve Deeks here at UCSF, as they were submitting this proposal. And so we've been advising the program since that time, which amazingly was 3 years ago. um, and I just, I'm involved obviously in a lot of trials, but it's been a real pleasure to be a part of this team. I think, over those 3 years, I've seen how thoughtful the team at BioVie have been in the design of the trial, being receptive to feedback, not just from people with lived experience, but also from academic researchers like me. And I think that they're very committed to the mission, and those are all good signs. And that's why I'm, really happy to be involved.
Uh, Fantastic. And so as a clinician and a clinical trialist, um, how would you say, what is the current landscape of the treatment trial landscape for long COVID? And then why is it so important that this trial fit into that landscape overall?
Yeah, so, in terms of and, even before clinical trials, in terms of the clinical care landscape,
Mhm.
you know, people are trying lots of things. Providers are trying lots of things for their patients, but there's not really a clear signal that any one treatment works best for most people. And
Mhm.
because of that, there's not really a standard of care. There are some drugs, like, low dose naltrexone or LDN that are being prescribed maybe in a plurality of people, but certainly not in a majority of people. Um, and, for much of the last 5 years, it sort of felt like we're kind of banging our heads against the wall, trying to ramp up clinical trials. I think that that's finally happening, and this trial is part of that. Um, there's been a first generation of clinical trials, and Ezra sort of alluded to this, that almost all of which were negative. But those trials, that first generation of trials was really important, specifically toward the goal of demonstrating that clinical trials for long COVID could be done and should be done, and could be done with rigor. And I think that those trials, although they didn't work, really opened the door for the second generation of trials. And this is one of the second generation, I would say. Uh, the current landscape of the second generation is that these trials are becoming more nuanced and more refined. They're becoming a little bit narrower in terms of eligibility, and I think we'll talk more about that. But one of the biggest criticisms that were sort of lobbed at the first generation of trials was that they were so broad, that we're in many cases not even confident that we were able to answer the questions that we were setting out to answer.
Mhm.
And so I think the characteristic of the second generation of trials is that there's better pharmaceutical engagement, by companies like BioVie, and there's more focus on issues of eligibility and design and outcomes, because we really want to set ourselves up to be able to answer with confidence the questions that we're seeking to answer. We don't want to miss a signal if there's a signal to be found. And so that's sort of where we're at.
I'm so excited to hear that because it sounds like, the second generation has really been set up for more success.
Yeah.
So now we have this trial set up for success, this specific Address LC trial. And what does that mean? What does success look like for this trial? How does this trial move the field forward in terms of, I guess, to say it a simple way, quote unquote, doing science?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing that is already a success is, funding for a trial like this, in a public-private partnership, like you mentioned, which is so important and should not be, undersold. And then, and the engagement of, a small pharmaceutical company with a compelling drug. This is not, repurposing of a drug that, you know, is already widely available. This is using a new and exciting drug that is going to drive the science forward. And that's already a success. In terms of on the back end of this, when we're looking at the results from this trial, obviously, there's the traditional mark of success of a clinical trial, which is whether or not the drug worked for the outcome of the trial. And obviously, we all want a positive outcome. But people need to understand that, even negative outcomes in trials, like these, which are really on the cutting edge, are so important in driving forward the science and providing clues about how to, about the biology and how we should design the next round of trials, the third generation of trials that, will come after this. I think that's related to sort of this taking a step back and thinking about the bigger picture, which the most important thing that we could be doing right now is conducting rigorous, publicly funded trials like these to demonstrate that they can be done at scale, that people are motivated to participate in them, that researchers want to be involved, that we can do it with rigor. Because, the likelihood of any one clinical trial being a home run is always low, but we need to demonstrate that we've sort of exist within this robust ecosystem that's going to drive progress forward.
That is so compelling, and I love how you say it's the broader ecosystem, because that leads so well into my next question, which is actually a question my mom asked me, and she said, I got ME/CFS before long COVID. Why should I be excited about a drug that works for a segment of long COVID patients? And so I'm going to ask that question of you, and so I don't have to answer my mom directly. I'll just have her watch the webinar.
Yeah.
But I'd love to hear about, there's such a sense of, the previous generations of folks who got ME versus the long COVID folks, and I really think this trial helps answer why that's such a false preset.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a great, it's a great question. It's an important question. It's a valid question. I think we can all probably agree that there's not been enough investment in the clinical trials agenda for, other infection-associated conditions that predated long COVID. The way I look at this is that we're all on the same team here, right? We all want answers across the full spectrum of these conditions, beyond long COVID, beyond ME, beyond, chronic Lyme, beyond, even other conditions that we don't often think about, like post-Ebola syndrome, right? These are all conditions that affect, significant numbers of people worldwide. This, opportunity, this call for applications that, BioVie emailed me about in 2022 was specifically on this condition, on long COVID. But opportunities like this in long COVID give us the chance, I think, to kind of course correct, decades of neglect, and to demonstrate that trials targeting people with these illnesses can be done and should be done. And so I think that any trial that we pull off in long COVID will ultimately benefit people with related conditions like pre-COVID ME, will garner further interest in this and ultimately result in an investment that gets people the answers that they need and deserve.
Here, here. And I'll just also, I just love to point out that that because this trial is zeroed in by symptom, that that when you stare into that beautiful spyglass that looks out to the horizon of where this could potentially go, then it's the symptom that's being treated, and that can be potentially across multiple areas or diagnoses as folks get a lot of different labels on their charts.
Sure, yeah.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Michael Peluso, thank you so much again for your time. I'm excited to get back to you in the conversation, but it's so exciting to bring in Dr. Penny Markham. And thank you, Dr. Markham, for joining us. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for your patience. I'm so excited to hear about your experiences and as the leader of this work. Can you tell us about how you got involved in this field of study and what drew you to this trial?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much for the opportunity for us to talk about our trial and give an overview and a sense of what it might be like to participate in the study. We're very excited to be where we are at the moment, which is starting enrollment and recruiting patients. It's taken a few years to get to this point. Back in 2020, actually, our company was focused on liver disease. But we were looking at repurposing a combination of drugs for acute COVID. And at the same time, we started initiating the acquisition of another company, Medics, which had a very interesting molecule, Bezisterim, which you'll hear more about. And just around that time, the alarming signal was coming out that COVID was causing ME, CFS, chronic illness in patients, and I have a first cousin who is ME, who's had chronically for 30 years, knew how devastating this condition is, and really started focusing on a potential application of Bezisterim. And as it turned out, the very early data of inflammation underlying the pathology of long COVID and the signals really supported that it was worth applying for funding, and we did through the Recover initiative. We had to pull together a massive application in the 10-day window that was allowed. Well, we got it in, but unfortunately, as you know, drugs that were in development that couldn't be implemented immediately if they were to show benefit in the Recover platforms were not selected. And then we pivoted and saw this opportunity through the DoD, through CDMRP, which obviously is a fantastic program. Patients have driven the selection of the topics, and the particular topic we applied to was neuroinflammatory responses in emerging viral diseases. So it really was pointed at COVID and long COVID. So we've had the grant for a year. It included a 6-month planning period, which was fantastic because it is, as you know, what we may have submitted a year prior in the application. The field could have changed, or the importance of certain outcomes may have changed. And we were able to implement the advice from the patient advisors, as you heard, and scientific advisors to develop the protocol. And the process prior to that, the process from application to actually knowing you're getting funded takes a year. So yeah, we can't believe we're at this point now that all systems are go, and we're actively activating clinical sites and recruiting patients.
Well, fantastic. So I know you have a little bit of a presentation for us, and I know everyone's excited to hear. So this is the question, right? What happens in this clinical trial, and what are we hoping to find out about Bezisterim?
Sorry, just sharing. Can you see that? Is it in slide mode already?
Perfect.
Okay, great. Sorry, just need to minimize. I'm blocking my screen. So our trial, as you heard, is called Address Long COVID. It is a double-blind randomized study, and we're evaluating the efficacy and safety of Bezisterim in adults with long COVID. And most importantly, this is funded by DoD. There's a disclaimer here that all the opinions are ours. And as I mentioned before, it was in response to a specific topic of neuroinflammatory responses to emerging viral disease, so very focused on long COVID. Sorry, trying to advance. Sorry, in Zoom, how am I?
Oh, it should just be able to click.
Oh, there, sorry.
There you go, yeah.
So what causes long COVID? As Michael mentioned, obviously chronic inflammation appears to be at the crux of the pathology. And there are numerous hypotheses that include, the virus persisting or viral fragments like the spike protein, reprogramming of these kind of angry macrophages that, can go around and cause havoc uncontrolled in the body, autoimmunity, which of course is another form of inflammation, reactivation of viruses, including EBV and herpes, which of course are normally suppressed by the immune system, but can reactivate after COVID infection, or viruses like the human endogenous retroviruses, HERVs, which are actually activated by chronic inflammation. Also microclots and endothelial dysfunction. The spike protein is very effective at binding fibrin and causing this kind of very resilient complex that is very pro-inflammatory and can attack the lining of blood vessels and cause endothelial dysfunction, and then also allow kind of permeability into the brain, or blood-brain barrier permeability. I'm going to focus on the TLR4, what's called TLR4 pro-inflammatory signaling pathway, because there's a lot of data pointing to the importance of this particular signaling pathway in the neuropathology of long COVID and in neuroinflammation. So just on my right here, it's a very simplistic diagram. But TLR4 is a kind of a sentinel receptor that's on the outside of immune cells. That is really its goal there is to detect invaders and then very rapidly and supposedly transiently should trigger downstream signaling to activate NF-kappa B, which is very prominent in long COVID, and the MAP kinase, what's called ERK, and these trigger the expression of anti-inflammatory or pro-inflammatory cytokines, IL-6, interferon gamma, and TNF. Normally that should just be a little burst of activity, but in long COVID, it appears that there is a sort of sustained activation of this pathway, and it may be what's called sterile activation, in that it's your own molecules are actively continuously maintaining this pro-inflammatory cascade. So there's a lot of accumulating evidence that TLR4 is involved, particularly in brain fog or cognitive impairment. The spike protein of SARS virus can actually bind TLR4, stimulate this pathway. We know that spike can persist for a long time in the periphery. It's also been shown to persist in the brain. In animal studies, if spike protein is injected into rodents, you'll see a long COVID-like syndrome that can be blocked if you knock out the TLR4 gene or if you block its activity. Also, naltrexone, which I know there are a lot of questions on, naltrexone is believed to have its impact on brain fog in long COVID by acting through this same pathway. And I just want to also add, which isn't in this slide, but these studies of looking at thousands of long COVID patients and looking at what proteins may be elevated or what is activated, what's the difference between long COVID patients and patients who recovered from COVID or control patients who never had long COVID. There is active elevation of these endogenous or your own body's inflammatory, what are called S100A molecules. I won't go into it, but they can also trigger this pathway and kind of sustain this kind of sterile inflammation, smoldering inflammation that seems to be very important to the symptoms of fatigue and brain fog. So bezisterim, or what used to be called NE3107, it's a derivative of DHEA, the supplement. And DHEA, there was a lot of studies 20 years ago of the wonderful benefits of DHEA in rodents where it possessed anti-aging activity, made mice live longer, had great anti-inflammatory activity in different mouse models and rat models of inflammation. And it turned out when they did clinical trials with DHEA in human participants, there really was no effect seen. And that's because the key molecules there that derive from DHEA as it's processed only do not last very long in the human body. They last longer in rodents. So our scientists, or the scientists who came to BioVie from Neuromedics, they created a version of DHEA that the metabolite of DHEA, which is called beta AET, that had a longer half-life. So instead of being almost undetectable and disappearing in the matter of a couple of hours, if you gave it to humans, that this derivative bezisterim had a half-life of up to 8 hours in participants. So most importantly, it retains its anti-inflammatory activity and crosses the blood-brain barrier, which is important if you want to target neuroinflammation. Unlike DHEA, it does not get converted to sex steroid hormones, and it doesn't bind steroid hormone receptors. It's also insulin sensitizing, and that might seem a peculiar attribute of this drug, but actually that pathway that I showed you, the TLR4 pathway, at the hub of that pathway, it really is and ERK is part of that complex. That's really is a point where inflammation drives insulin resistance and metabolic dysregulation, and they kind of self-fuel each other. It's an oral capsule, orally available, very well tolerated to date with a good safety profile. It's not immunosuppressive, and it has a low potential for drug-drug interactions in that the concentrations that are needed to inhibit these enzymes that break it down are really far higher in vitro than the concentrations that you would achieve if you took the drug daily. So you can see that those attributes, just to implement a drug rapidly into a clinical trial, they're great attributes, because kind of even though the CDMRP program is high risk, high reward, this actually presented a pretty de-risked drug candidate that could be implemented rapidly and tested. So why study this drug in long COVID? It does have an anti-inflammatory mechanism of action that really does seem relevant to the pathophysiology, as it inhibits TLR4 and also TNF-stimulated activation of NF-kappa B, and these are the drivers of inflammation, very pro-inflammatory, and you know, see, at the crux of the problems. It binds actually the ERK kinase, or the MAP kinase ERK1 and ERK2, which are a critical point of this pathway. It has shown activity in models of neuroinflammation that includes a TLR4 kind of driven model of Parkinson's disease, glaucoma, optic neuritis, retinal uveitis, and epilepsy. And there's positive signals in clinical trials to date that may translate to long COVID. We've seen improvement in cognitive impairment in patients with mild cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's disease, and improvements in fatigue and energy in patients with Parkinson's disease. And it is currently in a phase 2 study in Parkinson's disease. So I've just put a link here to our company's website, where all the publications relating to these studies there's, you know, are there, including any presentations or webinars we've done to date, if you want to have more detail around the mechanism of action. So as we mentioned, obviously Michael has been a key scientific advisor, and his colleague Stephen Deeks at UCSF. And additionally, we've had our other two key advisors in long COVID are Sherry Hsu and Igor Korelnik from the Northwestern Feinberg School of Medicine in Chicago. And Sherry was leads actually a global consortium on neurological dysfunction in COVID-19. And Dr. Korelnik started one of the first long COVID clinics focused on the neurological aspects, and it was key in characterizing the kind of the cognitive impairments in these patients early on. And as Ezra mentioned, we did have, we continue to have patient advisors that were really important in giving their perspective on how we could implement this trial for this patient population. As Inicia Corona, Lisa McCorkle, Ezra Spier, Shamer Sweeney, and Angela Vasquez. And they really gave a very important perspective and helped guide us, Lisa early on, and the other patient advisors as we were trying to implement the study. So the study itself is an early phase 2 study. It's signal seeking. It's double blind. It's a randomized study. And we are targeting 208 participants that will have a 50-50 chance of being randomized to either the placebo or the drug Bezisterim. We are using an informed enrichment strategy to increase signal detection. And I don't think I need to emphasize that because it really has been highlighted, the importance of getting a signal and are not missing it in this phase 2 study. We'll have about 18 clinical sites, and I will have a slide that gives you the location of those sites. Listed on clinicaltrials.gov, and we have a trial website, addresslc.com, where I will provide a QR code later on. The study design is there's a treatment period of 12 weeks and a screening period of up to 4 weeks. There's a 4-week follow-up period. So in the screening period, it's very important that we select the right patients for this study that will respond or can potentially respond to the mechanism of action of our drug. So there will be an initial visit where patients will be screened, and some labs will be taken just to rule out possible other causes of fatigue or neurocognitive impairment. And they will be assessed with their cognition will be assessed, and I'll go into those assessments. We will look at the reported fatigue, sleep impairment, post-exertional malaise, and quality of life. If they are eligible, they will come to a baseline visit, which will be visit number 2, and they will be randomized 1-to-1 to either the drug Bezisterim or a matching placebo, and they will take 120 mg capsule twice daily for the 12-week treatment period. During that period, there will be 3 site visits once a month. The end of treatment will be visit 5. And then the final visit is actually virtual. It will be a video call, and that's purely for safety, 1 month after the end of treatment. So the total number of visits to the doctor's office is 5 plus 1 virtual visit. And just to give you an overview of what the study visits will entail and the time that will be needed to complete the assessments, the screening visit, just because it includes some additional labs and assessments, will take about 3 hours, and this allows for breaks in between testing and rests. And obviously we'll take the informed consent, do a medical history, physical exam. There will be some labs and an ECG measurement. Visit 2, which would be the day of potentially of randomization. The same study assessments will be conducted, actually a subset of the study assessments, as well as vital signs and blood tests. And you can see here as we go across the various visits, it's the same assessments through the end of treatment. And then visit 6, as I said, is just a virtual phone call. So what are we measuring from an efficacy standpoint to see if Bezisterim can impact cognition or fatigue or sleep or potentially post-exertional malaise in these patients? We are looking at a number of tools and endpoints. First, we are looking at objectively measured cognition, and this is how a patient or participant will perform on cognitive testing. So we have created a bespoke cognition battery that includes tests that test parts of the brain or functions of the brain that have been shown to be impacted in patients with long COVID, and that can help us kind of increase our signal for looking at an impact of Bezisterim on their cognitive function. We're also looking at what's called subjectively measured cognition, and this is the impact that the patient reports on the cognitive symptoms they are reporting. Likewise, for fatigue, it is patient-reported fatigue symptoms and sleep. And for the post-exertional malaise, we're looking at the DePaul symptom questionnaire, and we're also looking at health-related quality of life. just very quickly, we are additional assessment of how a participant sees their global impression of severity of symptoms has changed, and how the clinician perceives their the impression of severity and change. We also have a subset of questionnaires just that are focused on headache, tinnitus, or decreased appetite, because we believe Bezisterim has a potential to impact those symptoms. And then, because this drug, although it has a good safety profile in that to date in clinical studies, the most frequent adverse effect has been headache, and that has occurred at the same frequency as the placebo arm. Nonetheless, this is a study in a population that Bezisterim has never been in, and unlike Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's, where it's an older age group, we anticipate the mean age of the participants we're enrolling to be about, in their 40s on average. So it's very important that we do complete safety assessments in this study. We'll be looking at the emergence of treatment emergent adverse events. We'll be looking at vital signs, ECGs, safety labs, and physical exams. We also have a number of exploratory biomarkers, which I'm very excited about. We're looking at over 400 biomarkers of inflammation and neurodegeneration. And we're also looking at changes in biomarkers of DNA methylation. This is looking at something called epigenetics. And there is very exciting data coming out that that COVID, at least initial COVID infection, seems to change this DNA methylation pattern, which could be contributing in blood cells and immune cells, that could be contributing to the ongoing inflammation and immune dysregulation. And we've just published a paper in the Frontiers in Neuroscience, that is reporting on DNA methylation changes we have seen in a subgroup of Alzheimer's patients that were treated with either Bezisterim and placebo. So what are the key inclusion criteria? As I mentioned, we are using an enrichment strategy. We are selecting patients that are reporting both cognitive impairment and fatigue, and that are from 18 to 64 years of age, that have long COVID as defined by symptoms of at least fatigue and neurocognitive impairment, an index COVID infection at least 3 months prior to screening. And this COVID infection needs to be documented by either a positive nucleic antigen or nucleic acid or antigen test in the medical record, or a clinical diagnosis by the participant's physician. And most importantly, of course, that symptoms cannot be explained by an alternative diagnosis. Symptoms for at least 3 months and not longer than 24 months from the index infection. This is what we believe to be an important enrichment strategy for those in the sort of earlier stages of the chronic illness. And at this point, because we're targeting neuroinflammation, we believe just in this first study, if we enrich for these patients, we have a higher chance of detecting that initial signal that'll be so important, if positive, to then evaluate Bezisterim in other groups of patients. Participants must agree to maintain any other regular medications at the current doses for the duration of the trial. Now, I'm just highlighting some of the key inclusion criteria, and key exclusion criteria are things that other potential causes of neurocognitive impairment or fatigue, prior or active unstable or progressive major psychiatric or neurological conditions. An example would be major depressive disorder that wasn't on a stable treatment for at least 3 months prior to screening, and participant is not planning to stay on a stable dose during the study. A diagnosis of ADHD prior to the index COVID infection. Obviously, we're doing cognitive assessments and ADHD prior to the COVID infection could complicate these assessments. History of chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, or POTS prior to the index COVID infection. And just want to highlight, because there has been a lot of questions on naltrexone, the participant would need to, if the participant is taking naltrexone, they would need to continue the drug 30 days prior to the first visit. And this is, as I pointed out, naltrexone actually is believed to act on the same signaling, pro-inflammatory signaling pathway that Bezisterim does. Because we are assessing fatigue and cognitive function at these site visits, it's important that we exclude medications that could impact those study assessments. So as I mentioned, naltrexone, stimulants like modafinil would be excluded, systemic steroids, but that could impact fatigue potentially. Topical steroids are allowed. D2 receptor antagonists like olanzapine, low-dose aripiprazole is allowed. Amantadine and N-methyl D-aspartate receptor antagonists like ketamine would be excluded. Now, because it is an investigational drug in development, the FDA requires you to exclude the use of drugs or that potentially could interact with the same enzymes that break down Bezisterim. So potent inhibitors of CYP3A4, and one of the important drugs here would be ritonavir, which of course is a component of Paxlovid, and potent inhibitors of CYP2C9 and CYP2C19 inhibitors. That would be an example, would be the antifungal fluconazole. There's also some restriction to medications that you can't take 12 hours before an assessment because they could impact what we're measuring. So sedating medications, short-acting benzodiazepines, antihistamines, that could be sedating. Note that non-sedating antihistamines are allowed. Obviously, alcohol within 12 hours prior to the study assessments, and cannabis-containing products within 12 hours prior to the assessments. So we are planning 19 site locations. If you have gone to our website already, you'll see that we have 5 active sites. And in this slide, I'm just including the ones that we are still in the process of activating. We have activated to date 5 traditional commercial clinical sites, and we are in the process of activating a large number of academic sites like UCSF, Yale, Mayo Clinic, University of Colorado, etc. And the website will be updated with the contact information for the personnel at that site. So you can reach out to that particular location once it is activated and listed on our website. And just where you can find more information, you can go to our trial website. The QR code is here. I'll leave it up for a little bit here so that you can capture it if interested to learn more about the study.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Markham. I'd love to bring the rest of the panel back, and we can leave that that QR code up, or we can pop up the QR code. It's all right. We have it elsewhere. So just a reminder, here's the QR code. Here's a little more zoomed in version for folks. If you're interested and think that you might fit the criteria for this long COVID trial, that's the link to get more information and sign up. So, we'll leave that up there for the QR code for folks who might be interested. We've unfortunately gone a little beyond time, so I just want to recognize we are at time. We're going to go a little bit over because we have so many questions to get to. But I just want to flag for those of you who need to jump off, please feel free because we are at our time. But I want to talk a little bit about, wow, what an interesting trial. Thank you so much for sharing this exciting opportunity. Just a couple questions about clarification regarding the eligibility and inclusion/exclusion criteria. So just to be clear, someone can only participate if they have fatigue and cognitive impairment. They need both symptoms. Is that correct?
Correct.
Excellent. And so, and then the previous diagnosis, I thought that was interesting, that if you have a previous diagnosis of ADHD, that is an exclusionary criteria. Is that also correct?
Yes.
And that's because of the assessments. Is because they want to make sure there's a
Yes, that would
baseline?
complicate our assessments of cognitive function.
Got it. That makes sense. And then I have to ask why, so many patients use naltrexone, especially low dose naltrexone. Why is naltrexone not allowed 30 days prior to the trial again?
But we just need a washout period to make sure it's out of their system, because
Oh, I see.
we are now giving them a drug that works through the same mechanism of action purportedly. And, we don't want, it would confuse our results. We'd have to start dividing patients up and analyzing them differently. And we really don't have the ability to do this in this, study. We're already dividing patients up by their age groups, so to speak. So or stratifying it.
That's so helpful to understand. And so in addition to those exclusion criteria, but with those exceptions, you can remain on your regular medication and supplements throughout the course, but you just cannot change during the course. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Got it. So that's really, I think, important for folks to understand if they're interested in being part of the study. So I'll direct this one to Penny, but I'd also love Michael to weigh in as well. What are the principal side effects of Bezisterim?
Well, just as I mentioned, the most frequent side effect in clinical trials to date has been headaches. But that has occurred at the same incidence in both the placebo arm and Bezisterim arm. So in the patients we've studied so far, there really hasn't been a safety signal. But as I mentioned, we are going into a new population, a younger population. And so it's very important that we are looking at all these other different safety aspects of the drug.
Thank you. And Michael, anything to add on that area? No, okay, no problem. And so moving on to the questions around, that are really bubbling up in the chat around the 2-year time frame for folks with long COVID. How exactly did you land on that time frame, and did that decision include input from the folks like Ezra, our patient advocates and patient advisories?
But I know that's a hard decision that we made. We really are just trying to do everything possible in this first study to not miss a signal. And we believe that ongoing neuroinflammation in those first 2 years can be more readily impacted and see a potential impact on cognition and fatigue. Now, of course, if we see the signal, we will be opening it up, we'll be analyzing our data, and funding, assuming there's unlimited funding, we will be opening it up as quickly as possible and broadening those criteria. But nobody will benefit from the drug if we miss the signal. So I know it's restrictive. It is this. We're not enrolling a broad population really, but it's just this first study, hopefully of more to come with Bezisterim.
Yeah, and I can say it's definitely something we talked about among the patient advisors and talked about together. And it's this real big challenge with these kinds of trials where we have to weigh the inclusion and the potential noise that brings in. And, I'm going on 3 years here. Somebody wrote in one of the questions about this that it was heartbreaking to see that it was only folks that were in their first 2 years who were able to be provided. And I get it, right? That's me, right? But I think when I put on my science hat and my patient researcher hat, I think that we need to do everything we can to kind of not stack the deck exactly, but to have a fair assessment of this specific drug for the kind of impact that it could potentially have on our illness. And we have to hope that that gives us information that will allow us to do even broader, much larger, and more rigorous studies. This isn't a study that is designed to go into an FDA approval. If this study is effective, if the study finds that the drug is effective, more research is going to have to be done. And one of the reasons I think it's great, I can say this, that we're working with a pharmaceutical company is they are motivated to sell this to as many people as possible that it works for, right? And so this is just sort of the first step in that process.
Fantastic. And I know we're running short on time, so I'll kind of do a little rapid fire. But one of the questions that really bubbled up in a lot of the conversation from the patients who are watching at home is kind of why was the trial limited to long COVID versus running a parallel ME/CFS arm? But I'm going to flip that and I'm going to change the way it's framed. And I'm going to say, instead of that framing, I'm going to ask you, what would it take if you had the magic wand? What would it take to get an ME/CFS trial to match in this drug space?
Funding.
Funding, just the magic funding.
Funding, and of course, we would love to do that study, but it would, it would be a decentralized trial. Obviously, we'd have the assessments done in those patients in their own home, which adds expense. This particular funding didn't allow for everything we would have desired. We're just really focused on seeing the signal, and then if we see the signal and we have funding, we would love to do those studies. Of course, I want to do it in those who are most in need. These are difficult decisions that we made early on in this phase 2 study.
I couldn't agree more, and hopefully we can see that coming down the horizon soon with our spyglass looking towards the horizon. So we've had so many questions. I'm so sorry we couldn't get to all of them today. I don't want to make promises for anybody, but we'll see if we can do some follow-up after this to answer some of the questions that came in through the chat we didn't have time to get to. But one last question, because this is definitely a common theme by folks in the chat, is can we access Bezisterim without being part of the study? Is that something that can be procured off-label? Are there any other pathways outside of being in the trial?
Not currently, unfortunately. It is a drug, in development. It's not approved by the FDA, and there is no open access program at the moment.
Got it. So if you think this might be right for you, you have to be in the trial in order to get access to this drug. Got it. Thank you so much for that clarification. Well, with that, I'm going to thank our panelists again. Thank you, Dr. Penny Markham. Thank you, Ezra Spier. Thank you, Dr. Michael Peluso. Thank you so much for your time. This has been such a wonderful panel to learn more about this clinical trial opportunity. And I just want to be so excited to see Godspeed on your continued work, and so excited to see more from your team as the results come in. And for those of you at home, thank you again for joining us today. I hope you found this free informational webinar educational and helpful. In the next few days, you'll receive an email with a link to today's recording of the session, and we'll also post that link to all of our social media accounts and our YouTube channel that was shared at the beginning, so you can get a copy of this if you'd like to review it later. And as our event draws to a close, a brief survey will appear on your screen. We'd love if you could share some feedback with us. We're always trying to improve. Really appreciate just those couple of moments of your time to help us get better at delivering this great content to you. And last but not least, if you'd like to see more educational webinars like this one, or you support our research and advocacy efforts, please consider making a gift to Solve ME today. These wonderful events are courtesy of donors like you. Thank you all who make this possible, who give to our organization. Many, many thanks again to our panelists, and thank you again to everyone who joined today. Have a wonderful rest of your day. May your spoons be full. May your rest be fulfilling. And may we all see treatments like Bezisterim accessible to as many people as possible as soon as possible. So thank you again, and thank you for joining us.